Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the webinar series, Long-Term Energy Scenarios for Developing National Energy Transition Plans in Africa. My name is Nadim Goussous. I'm a member of the Energy Planning Support Team at IRENA, and I have the pleasure to introduce today's session and participants. The LTS Africa webinar series is organized as an activity under the framework of IRENA's LTS Network, a network of energy scenario practitioners in the government sector. Over the next sessions, we will feature selected African countries and institutions that will share their good scenario planning practices for setting long-term policy, particularly in the context of the clean energy transition. This webinar series is organized in partnership with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, GetTransform, African Union Commission, African Union Development Agency, the African Development Bank, and the Ministry of Energy of Kenya. Partner organizations will take turn to moderate sessions in the coming days and will also give a short presentation on their activities in support of effective use and development of LTES in Africa. Today's agenda is the following. First, I'll quickly introduce the LTS network, its activities, and its objectives. I will then turn it over to the moderator of today's session, Mr. Christopher Gross, Global Team Lead at GetTransform. Following that, we will hear presentations by Eswatini and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research of South Africa. We allocate about 15 minutes to each presentation, followed by 30-minute discussion and Q&A. We then have a small session with a presentation from Chris on GetTransform's work on supporting energy planning in Africa. We will then conclude. During the question and answer session, we will try to address some of your questions. So please use the Q&A function to direct your questions to the speakers. There is also English to French simultaneous interpretation that can be accessed using the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. Also, the slides and recordings will be made available on the IRENA event webpage. We will be sharing the link in the chat soon. So I'd like to begin by just saying a few words about the LTS network. It's a network of energy scenario practitioners in the government sector. And it's a global platform for government planners to exchange knowledge and good practices in the use and development of model-based long-term energy scenarios, or LTES, to guide the clean energy transition. We also engage other scenario experts in this network, so from technical institutions, to keep our government planning community updated with the most recent trends in the scenario field. The network emerged initially from the LTS campaign that started in 2018, a campaign that IRENA served as an operating agent under the Clean Energy Ministerial. In the network, we currently have 25 member countries and 11 technical institutions. LTS member countries are those who have already good scenario planning practices established so that the discussion can focus on not just scenario-based planning, but more on peer-to-peer learning on the use of scenarios in the context of clean energy transition. It's just some words as well on the mental model of the LTS network. Long-term energy scenarios are a fundamental tool for energy policymaking. With a changing energy landscape, global agreements for decarbonization and innovations in the sector, the evolution of the energy system is uncertain, and using long-term energy scenarios has become essential to support decision-making for government planning. In that context, this is the mental model we use typically in the LTS network. So we focus on LTS used in the long-term planning processes of the government sector. Energy modeling tools are often used as inputs here to formulate the LTS, and as an output of LTS, governments develop policy documents such as master plans or strategies or roadmaps and use them to guide policy. Along these processes, well, stakeholder consultations take place with different institutions. The network's activities focus on LTS and the process itself rather than the scenarios themselves per se. And it also focuses on the institutional framework behind this all. With this mental model in mind, the focus of the LTS network has three components. The first pillar is about how governments develop scenarios, particularly in the context of developing scenarios to better reflect potential transformative changes. The second pillar is about how governments are using scenarios to guide the clean energy transition. And finally, the last pillar is about the different approaches on building scenario planning capacity within the government sector. With that, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Mr. Christopher Gross, Global Team Lead at GetTransform. Christopher is an energy specialist and project coordinator with experience in energy, power system transformation, as well as environmental policy and regulation fields. He held various project management and advisor positions in the German Agency for International Cooperation, GIZ, and worked in the energy country programs in Nepal, Tunisia, and South Africa. In mid-2021, he transitioned back to Germany and joined GetTransform as a team leader, which is a European technical assistance and partnership program that assists countries and regions to advance their power sector transformations. So, Christopher, please, your floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadim, for the introductions. Yeah, it's my great pleasure to be moderating today's session. As Nadim said, I'm with GetTransform, which is a European technical assistance program. At GetTransform, we're working with energy ministries, regulators, electric utilities, rural electrification agencies to advance their power system transformations. And together with Irina, we share the vision and the understanding that the long-term energy scenarios are a really, really important tool for informing policy processes, regulations, and to ensure that our energy transitions are technically, economically, and environmentally sustainable. I will talk more about this later, because today's session is all about two countries and two fabulous speakers that come from Eswatini and from South Africa. And we will start off the session with Ms. Nolwazi Khumalo. And Nolwazi is a senior energy officer at the Energy Department within the Ministry of Natural Resources and Energy in Eswatini. And she holds that position since 2012. Nolwazi is passionate about energy planning and the modeling of energy systems. She's been involved in the development of quantitative energy models for policy formulation for Eswatini for quite some time, and has accumulated experience in various models and their application. Throughout her career, she has built experience in the energy modeling tools and energy planning processes. She's also gained a couple of very valuable years in working with international organizations and coordinating with the International Renewable Energy Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, just to name a few. And she will guide us through how Eswatini went about updating the Eswatini Energy Master Plan. So who should be better placed to give us a very interesting keynote and profound presentation on Eswatini other than Nolwazi Khumalo? Welcome, and the floor is yours. We will start the presentation now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good morning. On my side, it's morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As I have been introduced, I'm Nolwazi Khumalo from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Energy in Eswatini. I'll be sharing my experience in the development of the Eswatini Energy Master Plan. Next slide, please. My presentation will look at the background of how it came about that we had an Energy Master Plan, and look at briefly the objectives of the Energy Master Plan, the implementation plan, methodology and requirements, as well as key policies that we consider for development in scenario development, and we'll look at the lessons learned and challenges. Next slide, please. The Ministry of Natural Resources was assisted by the International Renewable Energy Agency. It started in 2014 when we developed the Renewable Readiness Assessment, which was eventually completed in 2016. Upon completion of the RRA for the country, then the ministry received support again from the IRENA to develop capacity on long-term energy planning and planning tools. This is how the Energy Master Plan development was started in the country. So upon that, IRENA assisted us in starting and forming a core team, which included the key institutions in the country which are involved in energy planning. This team was led by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Energy, and part of the team was the utility officials, the Eswatini Electricity Company, the Energy Regulatory Authority, the Central Statistical Office, as well as the academia, which was represented by the University of Eswatini under the Center of Sustainable Energy Research. The core team is responsible for data gathering, model runs, and they play also a close liaison with international stakeholders for technical support. And they are also responsible for drafting the Energy Master Plan and other reports, and we also do presentation to various stakeholders. The Energy Master Plan was eventually launched in 2018, which has a planning horizon up to 2034. Next slide, please. The main objective of the Energy Master Plan is to guide investments in the energy sector of the country so that we are able to meet our forecasted demands using a least cost option. This investment plan is identified over the given period, which I've mentioned that is up until the year 2034 at the moment. And it also plays as a guide for industry development, for investors, for utilities, and the country as a whole, as it gives a predictable environment and energy sector development priorities. It also recognizes the opportunities that can be harnessed using available resources, mainly in the renewable energy space. At the moment, we are reviewing this master plan spanning from year 2034 to 2050, which is in line with the Global Net Zero 2050 plan. In the Energy Master Plan, you also find an in-depth analysis of the energy demand key drivers, and we've also given a more representative wind and solar generation as a resource. Next slide, please. The implementation framework of the Energy Master Plan consists of a steering committee, which gives policy direction and relevance. It endorses mainly the Energy Master Plan. And we have the working team, which is basically the core team, which I have mentioned, which participates in the training of the energy models, also responsible for data collection from the different stakeholders in the country. And we also execute the main analysis of the sector, as well as the writing of the reports. This team also plays a close liaison with our international partners. When we developed the 2034 Energy Master Plan, IRENA was the key stakeholder, which was providing training and analysis and technical reviews. So in the update, which is for 2050, the International Atomic Energy Agency is playing that role at the moment. We also liaise with other international stakeholders, such as the UNDP, and recently we are in discussion with CSIR and other local stakeholders. Next slide, please. The development process, as I have mentioned, it started from the project inception, and we had, for the current project for the year 2019, we were busy with the data gathering and update of the data from the 2016 master plan. And between the year 2021, we're busy with the model configurations. In the next slide, I will explain which models that we use. And at the end, we currently have a draft of the Energy Master Plan, which should be eventually approved by the cabinet. So that is the final approval, and then it becomes a country guiding document. Next slide, please. The methodology on the current update of the master plan, we have the planning horizon. We have the 2018 as our reference year, which we will model until 2050. For the energy demand analysis, we are using the IEA's MAED model, which is the model for analysis of energy demand. And we have different scenarios in this analysis, which looks into the different rates of the population growth rate. And we've also had assumptions on the electrification rate as well as the GDP growth rate. And for the energy supply analysis, we use the message model, which is similar to the SPLAT model that we used in the IRENA analysis. This is a least cost optimization tool. Its main input is from the MAED model, including a catalog of energy technologies which have different characteristics. For the demand, for the reference case, we assumed the reference case for the MAED model, even though we also have different scenarios in the message which run on the different scenarios that are in the MAED model. The modeling approach was also expanded for non-power sector, which accounts for the demand of other fuel sources other than the electricity. And we also model results include projections on investment required, electricity production, electricity trade, as well as CO2 emissions. And then further, we are now doing an analysis on using the ESST model, which is also an IEA model, which will assist in identifying and comparing scenarios and to demonstrate benefits and challenges as we are developing the sector. This will mainly guide our implementation plan. Next slide, please. I think I've mentioned the different models that we use. We have the Energy Balance Studio, which is an input to the MAED model. Then the MAED becomes an input to the message model, which form the results of the message, then will form an input in the ESST model. Next slide, please. This exercise is very data intensive. I think you've noticed that for this review, the data collection took about a year, but on the previous Energy Master Plan, I think we spent over a period of 2 years. But this is an exercise that is occurring as you are executing the model runs. So from time to time, you need to update and get additional data that you will need. So the main input on the demand is the energy balance, which forms, which is disaggregated in the MAED model, and other energy statistics. And we also require data on biomass and electricity and all other energy sources that are being consumed in the country. And in terms of the sectors, the energy demand, we have the residential sector, we have the industry sector, which consists of a sugar sector and a non-sugar sector. I think that the country economy is being run by the sugar sector. So hence the separation of the sugar sector from the other sectors in the country. And we have the agriculture sector, the commerce, as well as the public sector. So those are the key sectors that we've identified in the energy demand, which are further translated into the message model. We also require macroeconomic and demographic data, which we get from our Ministry of Economic Planning and Central Bank, as well as the CSO. We get the GDP growth rates, the discount rates, population, urbanization, as well as labor force data. And then in terms of power plants or your technology base, you require to have your power plant cost and resource availability. We get that from the ministry as well as the Energy Regulatory Authority and the utility. And we also require to have a topography, infrastructure topography data, which forms the energy system of the country. That data is obtained from the utility. And we also need key transporter transmission in terms of import development. This is why you need this data. And we have the other reports which we use for our scenario development. And we also need for your operation modalities. So we get the data from the utility. Next slide, please. These are the key policies that we utilize in order for us to develop our scenarios. We have the overarching document, which is the National Development Plan of the country. That is a key document for the economic recovery. So we identify different projects that will be developed in the country and include them in the scenario development. And looking at the resource available in the country, we considered data from the RRA, which was developed by IWINA. And we have also have the National Energy Policy, which is also a guiding document for scenario development. And we have the Energy Master Plan, which is also being used as well as the guiding document. And we have the Household Energy Survey, which guides mainly the electrification in the country. So those are the key objectives that we have separated from these documents. One main policy is to develop 50% of renewable energy and electricity generation by 2030. And we also strive to provide all households with access to modern energy by 2050, and as well as to develop 40 megawatts of solar PV and 40 megawatts of biomass by 2024. And we also strive to ensure energy security in the country by 2026, mainly we require baseload generation capacity by 2026, because at the moment we rely on imports. And we also need to provide adequate supply of energy to drive the economic recovery. Next slide, please. So basically, from this exercise, the number of lessons that we can share. The first one is the data storage and documentation of model assumptions. This is very key in the updates, and as well as to recall what has been done in the different changes when you are doing the model run. So then that requires a centralized energy data system. So everyone who is involved in the project, even outside of the project, must be able to access and assess the documentation and the model assumptions. From the traditional biomass quantities, we used estimates at the moment for the two projects. So we are now having an energy survey, which is supported by the World Bank, which seeks to quantify the different quantities of traditional biomass which are being used in the country, as well as to obtain measuring efficiencies of the modern wood stocks, because at the moment we are using estimates based on international statistics and local data from CSO. So we also had a gap on the data collection of small size facilities or auto producers, and mainly on the solar PV, which are not connected to the grid. That data will also be obtained through the energy survey, which we are currently undertaking as a country. And we also had challenges with allocation energy consumption end use sectors in the residential sector. So in the MAYET model, we are required to have energy consumed for water heating, for lighting, for appliances, and other uses. So that requires a calculated estimation. So we are currently working on that as well, together with the CSO. And then with the financing of data collection, we got a grant from the World Bank at the moment, which is assisting the country. But going forward, we require to have finance that is for data, purely for energy data collection in the country as part of the national budget. And we also required to maintain a high confidentiality and stakeholder management, because some of the data that you get from the stakeholders is highly confidential. So in the presentations, you need to ensure that this data it remains confidential. And of course, there's always room for technical capacity, because as I've mentioned in the 2034 Energy Master Plan, we used models such as LEAP for demand projections, and now we have received capacity. We are now using MAYET. So there's always room for additional capacity as we are moving along. And next slide, I think this could be my next slide. Okay, this would be, lastly, it will be, at the moment, we are also having challenges in terms of natural gas prices, as well as we are looking at stringent environmental regulations, such as the coal-fired. So we need to consider all those in terms of when we are developing. And lastly, there's always technological breakthroughs which you need to take care of in the Energy Master Plan. We are currently adding geothermal and as well as battery storage. Thank you. That will be the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Nolwazi. This was very comprehensive and very interesting. And me personally, I'm really, really impressed what you've been able to do in Eswatini. And I think there were some really, really interesting lessons learned. This is exactly the purpose of this webinar series, to make those lessons learned heard and exchange with colleagues and peers. And thank you very much for including this already in your presentation. I think it was really impressive also how you managed the process, coordinated within government, which is always a challenge to get everyone on board, but then also coordinate with outside partners and pooling in additional resources, and really also rely on the international institutions that can provide support. So thank you very much for that. For now, we will park questions, and we will first hear the second presentation, and then we will take Q&A for the two inputs in one go. So the second presentation will be given by Dr. Clinton Carter-Brown. He is the head of the Energy Center in South Africa of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. The CSIR is a government research body who is involved in supporting energy planning and research in South Africa. Dr. Clinton Carter-Brown, he is a very known figure in South Africa. He has held many senior leadership roles in the energy domain, both in the public and private sectors. He spent 18 years at Eskom, one of the largest utilities on the continent. And afterwards, he joined an engineering consulting firm, Oricon, and was seconded to the Department of Energy's IPP office. I think the IPP office is very much known to many of you, as it runs the auction programs for new generation capacity in South Africa. And currently, he's heading the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research Energy Center, and was appointed as the head of the center in 2018. He's managing a team of over 50 scientists and engineers, and the CSIR Energy Center plays a key role in the shaping and implementation of the organization's energy research agenda, provides a knowledge base for the South African energy transition, and supports the move towards a sustainable and clean energy system in which energy is used more efficiently and sustainably. Welcome, Clinton, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for that very warm welcome and introduction. I think in terms of, I'm going to share with you some perspectives around the related work we've been doing in energy modeling as the CSIR in South Africa, and our support to the national government processes in that regard. And I think first and foremost, just to acknowledge the key authors behind much of the content that I'm going to be showing you today, Dr. Jared Wright and Mrs. Joan Carlitz. I'm drawing extensively on much of their published work in terms of what I'll be sharing with you. Go to the next slide, please. So South Africa has been seeing sporadic load shedding or load reductions since roughly 2007. We right now, as you can see in the last 3 years, have seen escalating amounts of supply-demand imbalance. We have an aging coal-fired power station fleet. It hasn't been adequately maintained. And due to the availability of our generation fleet and the constraints there, we're not always able to meet the maximum demand in terms of both energy and demand of our national power system. So we have seen sporadic and increasing incidences of planned and automatic load reduction, and that has been escalating. So we have an energy crisis in the country. It's hampering our economic growth. And this is where the energy planning and the role around that in terms of what are our options and levers as a country, and what should we be doing to not only get the performance of our coal-fired power station fleet up, but also how we're going to transition our energy system and use this crisis to build new capacity, and what should that capacity be. Next slide. So as a country, as South Africa, we've been doing integrated resource planning, energy planning in the electricity power system for quite some time, well over a decade. Our 2010 Integrated Resource Plan was promulgated in 2011. And we then basically had a 9-year period where we had a number of drafts of our revision to the Integrated Resource Plan, but only saw it being gazetted in 2019. So we roughly had a 9-year gap between our two integrated resource plans. And I'll be sharing with you a little bit the journey in terms of what happened over that 9-year period and some of the major shifts that we've seen and the very important role that integrated resource planning in our power system has played. Next slide. So just really unpacking some of our learning and the iterative processes that we've seen in the feedback loops. We essentially live in two worlds. The one is a planning and simulation world, where we look at our inputs to the various models. What will the future energy demand forecast be? What are the different supply and demand side technologies? What are the costs now and into the future, as well as what might be the big constraints be in terms of the likes of CO2 or carbon budgets? That then all flows into an RP modeling framework in South Africa through our DMRE and the software we've also used in the CSIR. Plexos software is not the key though. The input data is. And using, in our case, Plexos, one can use a number of different tools, then achieving the outcomes in terms of, for a range of scenarios, what then is the least cost or optimal energy mix? What is the capital and OPEX profile of that? What does the CO2 emissions, particulate, and water consumption look like? And also importantly, a range of other metrics, such as, for example, what might be the opportunities around employment and the impacts on GDP. Those model outcomes then flow into a policy adjustment, largely a political process, taking the modeling outcomes and then agreeing on the national plan. And that then flows into the real world. The real world then being, what are we going to procure and how are we going to procure it? Then running those procurement processes. In South Africa, we've done that largely through running auctions of large utility scale, but it could also be done in the municipal space, rooftop PV, feed-in tariffs, a range of different implementation options, including capacity and energy markets, to then procure the energy, the outcomes of which then flow back into the modeling. And this has been a very, very important key learning for South Africa. Each year, as we implement our own renewable energy procurement, so we get a better understanding of the cost and the performance of the technologies, and that then flows back into the modeling. So each time we do our models, we're grounding those models and the input assumptions in the real world, understanding, what are the latest costs of the technologies, how are those costs actually trending in terms of the forecasts, so that our modeling most accurately or closely reflects the real world reality. Next slide. And we've seen a number of shifts, and I'm not going to go into the details. Of course, these slides will be available to you, and if you're interested, we could also have a number of the detailed publications that contain this. But in that 10-year period between 2010 and 2019, we've seen our integrated resource plan and the model outcomes hugely vary in terms of across a range of parameters. The energy mix in 2010 was really essentially large-scale coal and nuclear. Variable renewable energy was still largely in its infancy at that stage. And fast forward 9 years later, whilst we still have coal and nuclear as supply-side considerations, the major dominant part of the energy mix into the future, as per the modeling outcomes, is variable renewable energy, and in particular in a South African context, solar PV and wind, given our large land mass, a world-class solar resource and a very good onshore wind resource. We've seen our projections or estimates around demand really change quite substantially, and it's really been a challenge for us in that we have consistently overstated the demand forecast and increase in demand. So that's been a key learning. CO2 emissions, we have interestingly, and when we look at that in relation to the nuclear options, for example, In the initial deployments around about 2010, in order to reduce CO2 emissions, our modeling frameworks essentially led to us selecting coal as being the only not coal, nuclear, as the only cost-effective low carbon option available at that time. Now in our 2019 IRP, we still have some ambitions potentially to do large-scale nuclear, but with the cost reductions in variable renewable energy, we are seeing the ability to meet our CO2 carbon reduction targets very easily without the need for nuclear, for example. We have consistently been looking at imports in South Africa, initially in the form of coal, hydro, pump storage, and gas, and maybe gas as a fuel, and more recently, still considering hydro and gas as major import options into our power system. Next slide. Coal fleet performance has been a key input into our modeling assumptions. We already have a large power system. Coal dominates, so the assumed performance of the coal-fired power stations has a marked impact on our energy plans. And we have consistently seen a decline in the performance of that fleet, and hence our modeling has been reducing in terms of the expected availability and reliability of the coal fleet. In all of our modeling outcomes, new coal has been included from a policy adjustment perspective. Initially, coal was part of a least cost energy mix. Our latest modeling shows that coal only enters our energy mix through policy adjustment. It's not part of a decarbonizing and least cost energy system in South Africa. We have consistently been assessing a range of new technologies with each iteration of our RRP. Initially in 2010, a relatively high certainties around coal and nuclear, less so about renewables. And as we've proceeded with each of the iterations of our resource planning, so we have increased our confidence in terms of the cost and performance of variable renewable energy, particularly solar, PV, and wind, to some extent concentrated solar power, and more recently, the role and opportunities of energy storage in the form of batteries. So with each iteration, starting to get more confident in terms of modeling inputs for the new and emerging technologies, and then starting to see them being deployed on some scale. Security of supply always being carefully considered across all of the scenarios to make sure whatever it is that we are modeling, we will result in a secure system. And then increasingly starting to model explicitly the implications of the transmission and distribution grids, and making sure that the grid integration costs of different technologies are also being considered. Next slide. So I'm not going to go into the specifics, but we've used Plexos primarily because not only is it a commercially available and well-used and excellent modeling platform for doing this kind of studies, but it's also been the modeling system and platform that our own Department of Energy have used. So it provides us a benchmark or a basis upon which we can then model additional scenarios and using the same software. So if we are getting different results, it's not because of modeling tools or differences in philosophy, but quite simply different assumptions in terms of modeling inputs. Next slide. And just to give you an example of how we've then been implementing integrated resource planning as the CSIR and supporting our Department of Energy in terms of different planning perspectives. So this is really some modeling that we did last year. Really the big red dot is our present national policy in terms of our integrated resource plan 2019. And by way of example, what we then did is we said, let us fine tune and tweak many of the modeling input parameters, reducing some of the artificial limits on new build capacity, but very importantly, not forcing in the likes of new coal-fired power stations, allowing the model to optimize purely on a least cost basis, and then starting to assess what would be the energy mix and the cost points for increasing levels of carbon budget. So if we want to get more ambitious in South Africa, and accelerate the retirement of aging coal-fired power stations, replace that with new lower carbon energy sources, what would the cost implications of that be? And we've seen very, very insightful outcomes because of our excellent wind and solar resource and the aging coal fleet. We actually have the opportunity to accelerate the decarbonization at lower cost than our present national plan and at a very, very low cost premium. So South Africa is one of the countries best with natural resources that will enable it to largely decarbonize its electricity power sector at very little net cost increase. So that's going to be very good for our economy and the competitiveness of our international market products. Next slide. We've also been applying energy modeling at different levels of granularity. We've done energy modeling studies using the same platforms and processes for large industrial plants looking to reduce their energy mix and risk. We've also now more recently completed a study for the Garden Route District Municipality in the Western Cape in South Africa, doing an integrated energy plan at a geographic level for a subset of the country. And this is where we see a lot of interest now moving forward, is that municipalities, for example, who have historically been users of or buyers of energy from our national utility, in this case Eskom, selling that on to end-use customers, essentially being takers in terms of price point from Eskom, now looking to diversify their own energy mix and install their own PV and wind and natural gas and battery storage in their areas of supply, and be able to then manage the electricity supply and reduce the carbon intensity and the cost to their consumers. So we see a lot of interest now, moving away from just doing sort of national level plans to now regional plans and down to specific industrial plants using the same modeling frameworks. Next slide. And then just very briefly, and just aware of time, in terms of some of the lessons learned on our experiences, this has been a journey over a number of years for us. And it really is a learning process. Some of the key things that we've noted is that collaboration is central and key to this. Good energy plans are done through extensive consultation with a wide range of different parties, whether they be academia, the local transmission network operator, the various forms and the legs of government, industry. Really critical that one is extensively integrating. The system operator is key to that, really actively considering all of the deep stability and other issues that are going to make sure that whatever it is that you are planning is going to be practical and can be physically implemented. A key thing is to quantify and to really be able to quantify the outcomes of models and be able to quantify the implications of deviating from modeling outcomes. We all know that energy is also a largely political issue, that even if you have the best models and the best plans, what ultimately gets implemented by a country or by a company or municipality might look different. And what we see is a huge value in being able to quantify in actual terms, in terms of cost and operational performance, of deviations from plans. So if one, for example, is going to force a new technology in, whether it be battery storage or renewable energy, nuclear or coal, being able to then quantify what is the cost premium that one is paying by deviating from the least cost modeling outcomes. And that needs to be done periodically, consistently, and transparently. So there needs to be good governance in place that ensures that the modeling is done regularly, that changes that are made are transparent, that people have the ability to give inputs to those processes, and that the modeling results and outcomes are shared. Next slide. Very important to note that, and sometimes we get caught up in that the models have limitations. They will always be an indication. They're very useful, but what you implement may very well deviate from the model. The model is not a blueprint. It's not going to tell you exactly what you need to install in each future year for the next 30 years. It's a very, very useful planning framework that enables you now to design your various market structures that are going to capacitate the implementation of that plan. So if your model is pointing to the need to install a lot of battery energy storage technologies, for example, that then informs how does one then run market mechanisms or procurement plans to implement that. So the model will never be a blueprint. It will be an indication. It's not the plan. We've seen a large need to build up capacity and continuously. And I think it's a major challenge, an ongoing challenge for us in South Africa, is having the resource base to do this and to do this well. So being able to have the right people with the right skill sets, using the right systems with the right data is something that requires continuous attention. And then we say, be the bazaar, not the cathedral. So modeling on energy modeling implementation should not be dictatorial. It should not be, this is the answer and we must all implement. It should provide us with options. It should provide us with the ability to engage on different scenarios, test different things, as if one is in the bazaar, to have options. And that is so important. It's an enabling framework that gives us different lenses into the future. It is not the answer in itself. And eliminate errors through building trust. The more people one involves in the processes, the more transparent one is around modeling input data and assumptions and the outcomes and outputs. So that helps you to spot errors and to fix them. But very importantly, it builds trust so that everyone is understanding how models are run and how answers are arrived at. And that really becomes very important then in terms of getting buy-in to the outcomes and how that then translates into national policy. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Clinton. That was really, really interesting and touched on very, very many and important things. I also see there's some common lessons learned and challenges between Eswatini and your experience at the CSIR. I particularly liked your elaborations on the two worlds, sort of the planning and simulation world and the actual and real world, because in the end, plans must be implemented. And there is this very important notion how to go about this. I also thought it was very interesting to see how the process evolved over time, how different technologies came in and others went out of the plan, and how that informed the discussion in South Africa and getting everyone on the same page to move forward. And that also includes the ability to depict different comparative scenarios and the analysis considering the impact of least cost versus more industrialization versus more higher CO2 ambitions and what kind of impacts that have. And that really informs a more sound policy making going forward. Thank you very much also for sharing the lessons learned in terms of consultation, transparency, policy certainty, and very important also keeping the capacities there and have the resources to do all of the work. And I think we can unpack this now further with the discussion we have planned for the session. We have received a number of questions for both of you, Nolwazi and Clinton. And I would like to start off with a question to Nolwazi. This has been posted, so most of these questions have been posted by the audience. And regarding Eswatini, we received a question that Eswatini started the update of its first master plan immediately after that it has been published. So starting with the update immediately after the first publication of the master plan. What is your experience with the update in terms of the process and contents of the analysis? Do you think that lessons learned from the first process is being reflected in the second process? And would you talk about the importance of the process being continued? Yeah, so just not relaxing on the fruits of your work, but also looking into the future. No, Wazi, what can we expect for Eswatini?
Thank you, Chris. Yes, definitely. We started with the update immediately after launching in 2018. So mainly it was data gaps, because when you're developing the first master plan, we identify a number of data gaps, and of course, of which we can do without on the 2018 master plan. And then going forward, we're improving data collection on those areas. So we took definitely most lessons from the development of the first master plan. And again, in terms of energy demand analysis, we used LEAP, which was less in depth than MAYED. So there were a number of requirements that had to be taken care of on the second edition of the master plan. So yeah, but mainly it's data storage and documentation of the assumptions is very, very key. So you need to be able to recall why you did this on the first run and why are you changing it now. So you need those to be very well documented. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I believe for South Africa, we could also clearly see how the IRP process has developed over time. Maybe Clinton, what would be your take on this if you look back in history and where you stand now and how that developed now, comparing it also to Eswatini, which this development has been more recent, but South Africa looking back to, I believe, 2010. How do you see the process has evolved over time?
I think there's been, I think that the framework and the software and the processes that we follow have not changed. I mean, they've been optimized and tweaked, you know, PCs get faster, the capability of the modeling platforms improves. But the primary differences and the major developments have been around the modeling input assumptions and the improved understanding of the emerging technologies and keeping in pace with the international technology development. I mean, for example, what is happening in batteries. I mean, we know that they're getting cheaper. We've seen the huge cost reductions in renewable energy. So our transitional evolution over the last 10 years in South Africa and doing the planning studies has been around how do we make sure that we are keeping abreast of the expected costs and performances of technologies today and into the future, so that we are modeling the right scenarios and we're considering the right technology options. And that's really had huge, profound impact. It's not a change in philosophy or approach. It's a change around what are the options that we as a country have. 10 years ago, renewable energy was comparatively expensive compared to the likes of coal. Now it's cheaper. So those are the key things that have really driven our fundamental shifts, Chris. It's been the technology development on an international scale, and how do we leverage that technology locally?
Thank you very much. A second question that was sort of directed at the both of you is the aspect of power sector planning or power sector expansion planning versus energy sector planning. And how do you see that playing a role in the future? I mean, for South Africa particularly, you presented the IRP, which is all about the power sector. Do you see that being extended in the future? And also, how is it perhaps coordinated with other climate-related studies? This question was posed by the audience. And then maybe, Clinton, you can answer this first, and then it would also be interesting to hear the response from Eswatini on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Our work and what I presented has been largely focused on electricity. Historically, the electricity sector was largely decoupled from transportation, liquid fuels, and then thermal heating and industrial processes. That is no longer the case. And as we see the deep decarbonization need and opportunity, as well as the technology development and the emerging role of carriers such as green hydrogen, we are seeing a substantial blurring of the electricity power sector and the other energy sectors. We know that we will see deep electrification of transportation. either directly through the likes of battery electric vehicles and fuel cells, also through synthetic fuels. So we have in the past been able to do an integrated resource plan, energy power sector specific in isolation. That's no longer the case. What one really needs is an integrated energy plan, of which electricity would be a subsector. We as a country don't have that yet, and that is a work in progress. So yeah, absolutely, one has to tightly integrate broader energy planning with electricity planning, because electricity is going to play an increasing role in the decarbonization of transportation and heat. And those processes will need to be optimized. And of course, then linking into climate change and climate modeling, that becomes imperative, because it's broader than just energy, it's all the other sectors, agriculture and likewise. So there's a hierarchy of needs here. We focused on the electricity, that's because the burning need is in terms of our load shedding and constraints. The electricity sector is the sector that needs the most attention in South Africa right now. But also because of the decarbonization opportunity. Electricity is relatively easy and quick to decarbonize compared to the other sectors. So we see it as the lead, but increasingly won't be able to be looking at it in isolation.
Thank you very much. Nolwazi, what's your take on this?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris. For Eswatini, the energy master plan is comprehensive of all the energy sources, and the power sector is a subsector of the energy master plan. So the utility plans, the energy master plan is the basis of all those plans in other sectors. I think the main advantage of Eswatini is the size of the country. So you're able to integrate everyone in all the sectors quite closely, as well as the plans that are included in the targets in the NDC. They're also based on the energy master plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to touch a little bit on the use of the scenarios. And this is really about, are the outcomes of the plans legally binding or binding in a way that they are sort of leading to, or are they tied to government procurement programs or other regulation, or are they more indicative for the consideration of government to then put regulation in place? Can you perhaps elaborate a little bit on this, starting off with you, Nolwazi, now, and then over to Clinton, please.
Okay. In terms of the scenarios, I think one major lesson that we have picked as a country is when you look at the development of small embedded generation or pilot projects which are not attached, which are not in the grid. So we have learned that if you look at the development of those small embedded generations, they will hugely affect the way the energy sector is operated in the country. So that has assisted us into formulating a policy on how the SSEGs will be developed in the country. So that guides. And then further on the renewable energy policies as well, the scenarios have really mainly assisted the country. So that's why we are now implementing the 40 megawatts of solar and 40 megawatts of biomass. So those were the outcomes of the scenarios from the Energy Master Plan.
Okay, so sort of like this distinction between market-driven technologies and the ones that are procured through government. Is that also a topic in South Africa, Clinton? Regulation?
Absolutely, and I think it's an area of deep further work and the opportunity to inform this more scientifically or perhaps more through based models. We, at the moment, make certain assumptions in our national RP as a country that we are going to install, for argument's sake, 500 megawatts of embedded generation each year. Now, that then gets hard-coded into our plan. We know that we, especially given the amount of load shedding that we have, many consumers are installing rooftop battery systems or rooftop PV and battery systems on quite some scale. And the adoption of these new technologies, including the likes of energy efficiency, battery storage, solar PV, is becoming very, very disruptive. we need to develop the right bottom-up models that enable us to model those kinds of scenarios and understand, what will the customer choices be and what will customers naturally do over time, so that we can consider that as scenarios in our modeling, as opposed to a top-down, limit where we say, well, we're assuming a certain value. So there's a lot of work to be done around the scenarios of that and these embedded and technologies, but then also turning it on its head and saying, how can they be advantageous? We know, for example, the rooftop PV market has more opportunity for local content and job creation. So, scenarios that can be looked at in our energy plans is to say, if we, for argument's sake, need to build 3 gigawatts of new PV a year, how much of that should be in the embedded or rooftop space? How much, how will that drive and support our economy and local job creation? And hence, how do we then design the necessary regulatory environment that will then capacitate people to install a portion of that 3 gigawatts in the distributed market? So one needs to do the scenario modeling that really informs the policy as using those as examples.
Thank you very much. We've received one more question for you, Clinton, on the case of South Africa and learning from the increasing blackout times. I suppose this relates to load shedding and including those factors in the modeling. So you spoke about quantification. And additionally, towards the future, and I think this is where the question becomes interesting, how does the model incorporate the intermittency of a variable renewable energy or variability and the impact on the grid? And how does it tie in with other perhaps transmission development plans and so on? From your experience, how do you see these topics linked? Thank you.
There's two very important sub-elements there. So on the first, when it comes to the performance of our coal fleet, our integrated resource plan of 2019 assumed that we would arrest and further improve the performance of our coal fleet. The reality is 2 years later is that it has degraded substantially further. So our integrated resource plan is now presently out of date because it assumes that the coal fleet would be performing at a certain level, and on that basis that we would need to do various things. And I think this is where the power of modeling and the power of transparency and independence comes in, because what we, for example, as the CSIR have been able to do is then to take those same models and then say, but let's now run additional scenarios that reflect the reality in terms of the coal fleet performance. And what does that tell us? And that has told us, and as per our publications as the CSIR, that as a country, we are going to have quite systemic continued load shedding unless we take very key decisions around installing new capacity fast. So it's the power of transparency and resource planning to then say, as the conditions change, as we actually realize, no, the coal fleet performance is not stabilized and is not improving, be able to rerun the models that tell us then, okay, what is it that we should be doing in the immediate? How much additional PV and wind and natural gas should we be procuring on that basis? So that's been very powerful for us as a country and very valuable. And then the element around the intermittency. I mean, we know that the sun does not shine at night and that the wind is not always there. We explicitly model that. And I think this is where, quality energy modeling needs to be done by experts and specialists that really understand these things and that they treat them statistically correctly using the right modeling frameworks. And when that's done well and using a various, different levels of mathematical techniques, one is then able to ensure that what you are modeling reflects reality and that you will have, periods of the year where you will have low solar and PV production, and you need to have other supply and demand side options that are going to enable you to keep the system stable. And that's why, for example, in all of our modeling, we end up through our models, actually building quite a lot of natural gas-fired capacity and energy storage through pump storage and batteries, because of exactly the variability in the solar PV and wind fleets. So it all needs to be explicitly modeled. Not to say that it's all completely understood, As we transition from, say, penetration levels, at the moment South Africa renewable energy is under 10%, certainly to 20, 30, 40%, you're not fundamentally changing the operation of your grid. But if your energy models are starting to go towards 70, 80, 90, and then ultimately 100% low carbon energy mix, so you're no longer going to have the large coal-fired and other inertia, and a number of other technical issues start to raise themselves, which globally still need to be managed. There are some jurisdictions, Ireland and others, that are well progressed. They're operating systems with very, very high levels of instantaneous penetration of wind and PV, for example, and the technical solutions for those are emerging. So yes, there are challenges, but I think the good thing is that we largely have the time and the opportunity to solve those technical challenges. Given in South Africa, if we were to do large-scale renewable energy, it would only be beyond 2030 that we would start to really have challenges with variable renewable energy. And until then, our existing processes and operations should be adequate.
Thanks, Clinton. That's very encouraging for the future. Nolwazi, I would have a question for you around the consideration of the regional integration of other neighboring power systems. And have you considered this in your plans, and how? And do you consider any joint developments in the sector for the future? How do you see the role and playing it in your planning?
Okay, thank you, Chris. At the moment, the country depends on about 70% of imports coming from South Africa, from Eskom. And we also buy power from the power pool as well, and Mozambique. So our energy system, it does incorporate neighboring countries, South Africa and Mozambique. So we have considered how we can continue to integrate those two energy systems with the local country's energy system. So going forward, I think we'll continue to include them in our plans, especially up until the year 2030. They will still play a huge role in the energy system of the country. And then in terms of integration with other sectors within the country, yes, we are looking into that so that we can include especially the teams or the stakeholders from the climate change and NDC, because at the moment they don't form part of the core team, but they are a stakeholder in our engagements with them. So we're looking into including them going forward so that all the plans in the country are aligned with the master plan, or with how the energy sector will develop. We have recently included the team from the Ministry of Economic Planning, which are responsible for the development of the NDP, so that they also take into account how the sector will develop, and also play a role in looking into what are the needs for the energy sector as part of the economic development. So that is work in progress. It's some of the improvements that we have taken into account on the second edition of the Energy Master Plan.
Thank you, Nolwazi. So the last topic I would like to touch on is capacity and the resources that one needs for maintaining good energy planning system going forward. And we heard this already in the Monday session that was hosted with 2 other countries, and that it was a challenge, and I think you also alluded to this in your lessons learned. So my question would be really, how can we ensure that there is enough human capacity, and how can we maintain it? What's your experience with this? How would you unpack this challenge? And I think what we've also heard in previous iterations of the LTS network is really that some countries rather opt for doing it in-house in government. And I feel that's very interesting to see that this is done in Eswatini in that way. But then also some of them are rather outsourcing or subcontracting, working with consultants. How do you see that playing a role for your processes in your countries? And is it difficult for you to keep the capacity and to also ensure that there is a degree of certainty and consistency in your planning approach with the people that are involved. Maybe starting off with Nolwazi, why did you opt for the process that you have, and how do you keep your resources alive and ensure that there is a good process going forward?
Okay, thank you, Chris. I thank you for Eswatini. Energy planning was a subject that was not known. It was new, and it was important for the ministry to first understand what is happening and what it's all about. So as we're moving forward, we noted that it's important for the process to be driven by the ministry, in cooperation with other stakeholders, the utility and the regulator. So in terms of capacity, I think it is important that the capacity lies within the country rather than to rely on consultants from time to time. So in the absence of a key institution for the country, this will be driven by the ministry in collaboration with the other sectors. So capacity, luckily for the ministry, we have not had much exit of officials from the ministry who are capacitated. So we're still maintaining the same team that we started with in 2014. And we also, from the ministry, I think we have about 6 officials which have been trained. So I think those will maintain the continuity going forward if some of the officials have to leave the ministry. So we're hoping that to assist in maintaining the capacity within the ministry, or basically within the country. Then that is quite important that to maintain the continuity. Thank you.
Thank you, Nolwazi. Clinton, for you at the center.
Look, in South Africa, energy modelers are, a commodity. We as we see the deep decarbonization of energy and industries really look to take control of their own energy supply, security, decarbonization, and cost pressures. So energy modeling resources have commercially become a very highly commoditized skill set and very sought after. So being an energy modeler, the people on this webinar, this is a new emerging market opportunity, and for people to become experts in. It's almost a whole new sort of sub area of engineering or energy R&D. We traditionally, it was really only done by national governments and departments of energy, and it was in some respects a very boring exercise of large-scale coal-fired power station procurement, for example, in South Africa. That's now very different. And I must say, I'm very, very honest and transparent. Building up the resource base, keeping the resource base is a challenge in South Africa. The energy modelers are in such demand, which is great. So that, in terms of historically, it's been done through our Department of Minerals and Energy and Eskom, and we have always had deep energy modeling experience in Eskom, and Eskom have largely been instrumental in assisting our department with doing the modeling. Our department also has energy modelers and experts, but increasingly we see the need to collaborate, and that between organizations like ourselves, academia such as the universities, the national system operated through Eskom, and our Department of Energy, that we need to have a collaborative skills base and training and development program for energy modeling, and to make sure that we've got the skills in the country and that we're continuously building that skills base. So it historically has been done in a certain way, but I see increasingly, and as we get into full energy sector coupling, the skills development, postgraduate research and studies, and career pathing for young graduates in this space is going to be an area of focus.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes our Q&A session for today. There have been a couple of other questions which we were not able to take since our time is limited with this webinar, but I can perhaps encourage the colleagues who are here on the call to reach out to the presenters, Nolwazi and Clinton, and to follow up bilaterally or to follow up with the IRENA or Get Transform team, and we facilitate that these questions are still being answered. Thank you very much for the really, really great, insightful presentations and also for the discussions. I have learned a lot, and I'm sure so did most of our viewers. We would now continue with the last presentation, and then we will conclude with a closing wrap up by IRENA. And for this, I will step out of my moderator role and step into a presenter role and provide some more information on other opportunities for collaboration as part of the LTS series. And this is about the Get Transform program. Myself, I'm the team leader of this program, and we are providing support to national and regional public partners in Africa and Latin America on advancing with power system transformations. This program is funded by a couple of like-minded contributors. That includes the European Union Commission, Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Austria, and exists since 2020. Next slide, please. So this program is called Get Transform, Global Energy Transformation Program, and Get Transform as a particular subset of this program. We are implemented on the GIZ through the GIZ structure, which is part of the German international cooperation, but are very much a European technical assistance program working in Africa and Latin America to advance power sector transformation and to contribute to knowledge sharing and mainstreaming of country and regional experiences. In the program, we are organized on 4 major work streams. That includes long-term energy planning, on-grid regulation and markets. This is upcoming still. Off-grid regulation and markets, where we've been very active in the past, and renewable energy grid and system integration. And we believe these 4 elements are crucial for developing the regulatory, technical, and ecosystem for power system transformation and to move ahead into a sustainable future and to also ensure there's access to sustainable electricity. It all starts with energy planning, which is the foundation and which paves the way and basically is the foundation on which markets are built, but also on which the power system is built and on which the power system runs safely. So we always need to think of all of these aspects as we move forward into an enabling regulatory environment that in the end combines the 2 worlds that Clinton's presented, the real world and the energy planning work. So with the development of long-term energy scenarios, we've debated this now quite extensively, but it's really assisting in planning a world that is technically, economically, environmentally sustainable and where we really can benefit of the comparative analysis of the different policy objectives and the conflicts therein, and to make informed decisions going into the future. And we believe there's many opportunities to seize. That includes now the green recovery, fighting the COVID crisis. It includes the drop in technology costs, in particular in the renewable space, but also the development of new technologies in the storage space, digitalization, and that we really come to a least cost power system of the future that also speaks to environmental concerns, but also economic opportunities for everyone involved. Next slide, please. So with Get Transform, we've been active since 2020 and have worked with a couple of countries and regions. Much of the focus in Africa so far has been on supporting off-grid electrification, but we realize that the topic of energy planning is becoming more and more important, and it's being requested by many of the partners that we're working with. We just heard from Clinton that the demand is very strong also to find people that really have the expertise and can provide that expertise to the continent for further developing power systems in Africa. And so far we've been coordinating our work in the African region alongside with the African Union Commission and the African Forum for Utility Regulators, as well as with regional power pools. And here there are a couple of continental initiatives that will also be presented as part of this LTS series in the future, one of which is the Continental Master Plan. And I think here also it will be really interesting to see in the future how sort of the continental and regional planning fits then together with the national energy planning that we heard today. So far with GetTransform, we've been also involved in Uganda and Mozambique with the off-grid regulations, and more recently also in discussions with Uganda in providing additional support on national energy planning over there. On the topic of renewable energy grid and system integration, we're supporting a couple of countries in Latin America, including Peru and their system operator, how to include more renewables into the power system, and then how to ensure that the system runs smoothly with that increase going forward. Next slide, please. So our contribution to long-term energy planning, what are we doing at the moment? We are providing in-depth support to partner countries in developing energy plans, and that usually includes a first assessment of the energy planning landscape, including the objectives, processes, and tools applied, and then to also make available opportunities for capacity building. So we do not prescribe any tools or models to work with, but really rather to work with what already exists, and then to ensure a strong national ownership and to assist the partners in their energy planning and to make it better over the time. And then there's a lot of backstopping to further develop and update the models, for example, to better represent renewable energy or other technologies. And this is something that we're looking to expand in a couple of years to come. We're also very much involved in supporting regional knowledge sharing and peer exchange. And today, this event is part of this, but we're also busy in developing further regional insight reports and guidelines. And one of that's in the making is an energy modeling guidebook, and we're hoping to make this available in the course of this year. We're also involved in some of the continental initiatives that includes the African Continental Master Plan, and here the transmission planning more specifically. This work is also coordinated through the continental institutions, including the AUC, the Order NIPAD, and the AFDB and others that are also part of this webinar series. And very important, we also coordinate this with the European Global Technical Assistance Facility that some of you, I'm sure, have heard of, and working very much in sync with other European technical assistance program, and also with the larger GIZ network with a lot of the projects that are present on the ground in countries. And we're also now in the future looking forward to a deepened partnership with IRENA. And this is really to build more capacity and to disseminate training material that's being developed at the moment through the many processes that are ongoing. And we've heard of some of them today, and more of which is to come in that partnership. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to say thank you, and please feel free to get in touch. There's also our website at the bottom, and you can also email me directly if you want to get involved, have more information on the program. And with this, I would hand back to Nadim for additional questions and closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's always good to hear about the work being done by GetTransform. And thanks again as well for the fantastic presentations and discussions by the speakers from Nolwazi and Clinton and yourself as well. So being wary of time, I'll just try to ask a couple of the questions that we got. So I'll just begin with the first one to Chris. So which countries have GetTransform worked with in Africa? So that's one question. I think you mentioned a couple of the countries. And well, I'll let you answer that and I'll go ahead to the next question.
Thank you, Nadim. So far in Africa, we've worked with Uganda and Mozambique. And then we had some regional interactions through the continental institutions. So far, this has been our scope because we always want to make sure that we really provide in-depth support and not just coming in for like a small activity and then leaving after that has not fully been completed, because we know, especially on the side of policy and regulatory work, it always requires time. So we want to adhere to a good due diligence for providing our support. In the future, we are looking forward to expanding to more countries. And here we are still sort of like in a scoping exercise. And but I think we're also open to hear from countries that are progressing in that, request assistance from us, and to see how we can accommodate this and to enter into discussions. And yeah, so we're basically planning a new project phase that's going to start soon. And I can invite people who are interested in collaboration to reach out to us. If it's not directly being provided by GetTransform, we may also be able to link with the broader GIZ network of projects. In GIZ, we have more than 100 GIZ projects, and many of them are also bilateral, active in countries. And we also act as that interface. So it's always good to reach out if you're interested and to design a program around the topics I presented.
Great, thank you. And I'll try to ask one more question as well. It was a combination of a couple of comments that we got. So, well, what kind of stakeholders do you mostly work with? So I see there are questions about NGOs, private firms. Can you elaborate on which stakeholders have benefited really from, or can benefit as well?
Yeah. So our focus is really working with public sector institutions. So mostly these are energy ministries, electricity regulators, or electric utilities, down to rural electrification agencies. Less so, we would work, we work with NGOs, but as implementation partners and universities, but our direct counterparts are public sector agencies.
Thank you. And one more question. I think that would be the final question. So why is the focus on Latin America and African countries in particular?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a function of different interests. I think we received the requests from the regional institutions in both continents to be working with that. That also forms part of the larger European partnership in supporting energy sector development more globally. And at the time the project was set up, it was also to work with two regions, so to also ensure that there could be a knowledge sharing, an exchange from the two regions, which are somewhat facing very similar challenges. And I think what would be of interest also is to share that we've conducted this webinar series before with Irina, also in Latin America, and this is also all online. And there have been so many interesting lessons learned and the sharing of resources and knowledge. I think that is also very interesting to discuss within the African context. And I think we're also still together with Irina publishing further write-ups on that session and make it also available to the African discussion. So not only focusing on one continent, but really also benefiting from a true global experience, I think is crucial, since the world is getting more global and technology is also global, and resources and information flows are global. So hence we took an approach from the beginning to expand that, especially for the purpose of knowledge sharing, to expand the scope to 2 regions.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think that's it for time. So thank you. It was a pleasure as always. And thanks again to today's speakers. So I'd like to just quickly conclude today's session with the announcement of the next session. The next session is scheduled for Friday this week and will feature a presentation by the Energy Commission of Nigeria, moderated by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Today was the second session of the webinar, so if anyone has any feedback on the way forward, please write to us at ltes@irena.org. We will now play a 1-minute video on the LTS network and we'll close with that. So thank you once again for attending today, and I hope to see you all on Friday. Thank you.
The world of energy is changing. The energy system of the future will be based on sustainable, renewable energy. Innovation and digitalization are changing the way we consume energy. How can decision makers in governments and businesses prepare for the energy transition? Long-term energy scenarios, LTES, can help plan for a low-carbon future by identifying opportunities, potential risks, and cost-effective near-term solutions. IRENA actively supports energy planners through its global LTES network. Governments can share their experience, exchange best practices, and explore the most pressing future trends together with global experts. Government institutions and supporting technical agencies can become members of the LTES network. Join us. Contact LTES at irena.org for more information.